There's a version of you that keeps explaining, keeps justifying, keeps making sure people understand your intentions, your reasons, your side of the story. And no matter how clearly you explain, it never feels like enough. What if that exhaustion isn't a communication problem? What if it's a power problem? Think about the last time someone misunderstood you. Maybe it was at work, a decision you made that someone questioned. Maybe it was with a friend, a boundary you set that they pushed back on. Maybe it was just online, someone who read your words wrong, and you felt it, that pull, that almost physical need to explain yourself, to clarify, to add context, to make sure they get it. So you started talking, or texting, or explaining, and somewhere in the middle of that explanation, something strange happened. You felt smaller, not clearer, not understood. Smaller, because the more you explained, the more you implicitly communicated one thing. Your opinion of me matters so much that I will reorganize my words, my energy, my time, just to change it. Psychologists call this approval-seeking behavior, and it has a surprisingly deep root. It starts in childhood. The very first time we learned that explaining ourselves was how we survived conflict. When you were small and the adult in the room was angry, you explained yourself to make the tension stop. You learned words can protect me, silence feels dangerous. And that lesson, written in the earliest version of your nervous system, followed you into adulthood. Now you over-explain to your boss. You over-justify to your friends. You write long texts to people who barely respond. And then you lie in bed wondering why you feel so drained. Here's what no one tells you. Constant explanation is not communication. It's submission wearing the costume of clarity. Before we go further, I want to say something clearly. You are not broken. You are not weak. What you've been doing, this over-explaining, this people-managing, this verbal armor, was once a very intelligent response to your environment. Your nervous system learned that silence could be misread, that stillness could be punished, that if you didn't control the narrative, someone else would control it for you. That was adaptive. It worked once. The problem is, the brain is loyal to its old solutions. Even when the danger has passed, it keeps using the same tool. It keeps explaining in a world where no one is actually threatening you. Psychologists call this a schema, a mental template the brain uses to interpret the world, built from early experience and applied automatically, even when it no longer fits. You're not anxious because you're weak. You're anxious because your brain is running a very old program in a new situation. And the question isn't, why am I like this? The question is, what happens when I finally stop? What happens when you go quiet? Here's what's actually happening inside your brain when you over-explain. There's a structure in the brain called the amygdala. Think of it as your internal alarm system, always scanning for threat, social rejection, disapproval, conflict. To the amygdala, these register the same way physical danger does. Your heart rate rises, cortisol floods the body. The brain screams, fix this now. And explaining feels like fixing. It gives you the illusion of control over how someone else perceives you. But here's the cruel loop. Every time you explain yourself under social pressure, you send a signal to your own nervous system. That situation was a threat. I needed to defend myself. And the next time a similar situation arises, the amygdala fires faster, louder, earlier. You've accidentally trained your brain to treat other people's opinions as emergencies. Now here's the model I want you to hold on to. Imagine a lake. When a stone is thrown into a still lake, you can see exactly where it hit. But when the lake is already full of waves, already churning from your own movement, the stone disappears into the noise. Your over-explaining creates the waves. It makes you easier to read, easier to affect, easier to destabilize. Silence is stillness, and stillness has a strange effect on people. It makes them uncertain. They can't locate your vulnerabilities. They can't calibrate how to affect you. There's a term in behavioral psychology, reactive devaluation. When someone perceives that you need their approval, they unconsciously value you less. Not because they're cruel, but because the human brain interprets high need as low value. It's tribal psychology, ancient status wiring. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop chasing understanding, something shifts. The social calculus changes. And that shift has nothing to do with manipulation. It has everything to do with nervous system regulation. You can't be steady for others until you stop performing steadiness and actually become it. But how do you actually get there? There are 5 principles. Each one is grounded in how your brain actually works. None of them require you to become cold, distant, or emotionless. They require you to become deliberate. Principle 1. Notice the urge before you act on it. When you feel the pull to explain, pause. Just for 5 seconds. Don't suppress it. Don't perform calm. Just notice it. In neuroscience, this is called effect labeling. The act of observing an emotion activates the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational, deliberate part of your brain, and it literally reduces amygdala activity. You think more clearly when you name what you're feeling. In real life, next time someone questions a decision you made, instead of immediately responding, take a breath and internally say, I feel the urge to justify myself. That's it. Just name it. The urge doesn't disappear, but you're no longer being driven by it. Principle 2, let silence do what words cannot. Silence communicates something words never can. It communicates that you are not afraid of the discomfort. Psychologists studying social dynamics have found that people who are comfortable with silence are consistently rated as more confident, more trustworthy, and more authoritative. Not because they said more, but because they weren't rattled by the pause. In real life, when someone challenges you and you don't have a response you fully believe in, say nothing. Or say, I'll think about that. That's not weakness, that's self-possession. Principle 3, stop justifying decisions that don't require a jury. You are allowed to make choices without submitting them for approval. In psychology, there's a concept called internal locus of control, the belief that your life is guided by your own judgment rather than external validation. Research consistently shows that people with a strong internal locus of control report lower anxiety, higher resilience, and greater life satisfaction. Every time you explain a decision that no one had the right to question, you give away a small piece of that internal authority. In real life, you changed jobs, you left a relationship, you stopped going to certain events. You don't owe anyone a thesis defense. It felt right for me is a complete sentence. Principle 4, protect your energy like it's finite, because it is. Every conversation where you over-explain costs something real. Cognitive and emotional energy is not unlimited. Research on ego depletion, while debated in its specifics, points to a real phenomenon. Self-regulation draws on finite mental resources. The more energy you spend managing other people's perceptions of you, the less you have for the things that actually build your life. In real life, think about how you feel after a conversation where you spend an hour defending yourself. Now think about how you feel after a conversation where you simply said what you meant and let it land. The difference in depletion is not subtle. Principle 5, let people sit with their misunderstanding. This one is uncomfortable, but it's perhaps the most important. Sometimes people will misread you, and they won't come to you with curiosity. They'll come with conclusions, and you will feel the almost unbearable urge to correct them. Here's the truth. The people who matter will ask. The people who don't ask are telling you something about whether their understanding of you is worth your energy. In cognitive behavioral terms, this is about tolerating uncertainty, one of the most trainable and most transformative psychological skills there is. When you can sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood without immediately acting to resolve it, you build psychological resilience. You also send a very clear signal to yourself and others. My sense of self does not depend on your version of me. In real life, someone makes an assumption about your choices. You feel the heat of it. You breathe. You don't correct them. And the world doesn't end. And you feel quietly more like yourself than you did before. Here's the mental model I want you to carry with you. A deep lake has no need to prove its depth. You don't look at the ocean and think it's shallow because it isn't loudly announcing itself. The depth is evident in its stillness. The most grounded people you've ever met, the ones who felt somehow solid, trustworthy, real, weren't performing. They weren't explaining. They weren't managing your perception of them. They were just in themselves. That's not a personality type. That's a trained state. Your nervous system learned to talk its way out of discomfort. It can learn through practice, through patience, through the accumulation of small, quiet choices, that it is safe to stay still, that it doesn't need the verdict, that it doesn't need the explanation accepted, that it can be misunderstood and still be whole. Going quiet isn't about becoming invisible. It's about becoming unreadable to everyone except the people who actually look. I want to leave you with this. There is a version of you that exists before the explanation, before the justification, before the performance of being someone other people can comfortably understand. That version of you doesn't need to convince anyone. It doesn't need to be loud to be real. It doesn't shrink when it's questioned. It simply continues. Silence chosen deliberately is not the absence of strength. It is strength with nowhere left to prove itself. The most powerful thing you might do today is nothing. Say less, explain less, and notice what happens when you trust yourself enough to let the quiet speak.